Rankia, if you're talking to us, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. It's 6 o'clock, and I'd like to go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. My name is Rakia Nance, and on behalf of the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. This meeting is to discuss the Our Water program as it relates to the Gingerville Manor Estates community and also neighboring communities in the area. I do want to note that tonight's meeting is being recorded, and further on in the presentation, we'll explain how you can be able to access the recording and also the presentation slides. I'd like to introduce some of the folks you'll be hearing from tonight. From the Department of Public Works, we have George Heiner, also Kim Clooney, and Kiana Ray. From HDR, in addition to myself, we have Ed Shea and Megan Robinson. Tonight's meeting is being hosted on Zoom, and here are the tools and features that you can use during the presentation. We're going to ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and to ensure optimal bandwidth, please turn your camera off. We're going to be presenting quite a bit of information tonight, and we do encourage you to ask questions as we go along. To do that, please enter your questions into the chat box, and we will address them in the order in which they are received. You may also use the raise hand function if you would like. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to present information about the Septic to Sewer program, the program that the Department of Public Works has developed to reduce the cost of connecting from private septic systems to the public sewer. We've received interest from residents in this community, and I do want to note that this meeting is non-binding. Instead, it's designed to help you all learn more and make an informed decision on whether or not to connect to public sewer. Tonight's meeting is not any type of petition or asking for votes. It is information only. A lot of what we'll be discussing is conceptual, and nothing has been decided or confirmed as of yet. And do keep in mind that it is a community decision whether to connect to public sewer, and later on we'll be talking about how residents in the area can work together to decide if they want to move forward in the process. Here's an overview of the information we'll be discussing. First, we'll talk about our water as it relates to the Gingerville Manor Estates community. Then we'll discuss funding and costs, followed by information about the application and petition process. And then we'll discuss next steps and have extended Q&A. And with that, I will turn things over to George Heiner with the Department of Public Works to discuss a background on the Our Water program. George?
Thanks, Rakia. I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. So I'm going to be speaking at a couple different spots tonight in the presentation. As Rakia mentioned, we have a lot of information to cover. And we want you to feel free to put questions in the chat box, and we'll try to keep up as they come in. At the beginning here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the Our Water program and sort of what some of the goals are and the reason for it. And then I'll be back a little later to talk about the application process. One thing I guess I want to make sure everybody understands is this is, as Rakia mentioned, this is an informational meeting. There is no county capital project that is underway or set up to bring sewer service to this area. Okay, so what this discussion tonight is about the changes that the county has made to the petition process, which is where residents request Public Works to extend service to their area. So I just want, we've been doing a number of these meetings this summer, and I think that's been a point of confusion at the beginning, so we'll probably repeat that a couple times, but this is an informational meeting and there isn't an active county project that's planned to bring sewer into this area. What is the Our Water program? So the Our Water program is a multi-faceted approach that Public Works has developed to maintain the health of our waterways and strengthen water resiliency. Can you go to the next slide? The program has 5 different initiatives of it. One is called Small System Upgrades. This is where we're looking at taking over small private wastewater treatment plants and upgrading them to county facilities where they can achieve a lot better nitrogen removal. And second is their stormwater program. Most people are familiar with the stormwater fee, and that goes to fund a number of a lot of projects, not just a number of projects. So there's been a lot of progress in that stormwater component. There is a groundwater resiliency component of the program that we're going to be talking about more in the future, but not really in tonight's presentation. There's wastewater treatment enhancements, and the county has invested a lot of money over the last 10 to 15 years on upgrading its wastewater treatment plants. They're achieving really high levels of pollutant removal, nitrogen removal. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but we're going to try to continue improvements at those wastewater facilities. And then the part of the program that we're talking about tonight is the septic sewer connection program. And so that's one element of the 5, and we're going to talk in more detail about the changes that have been made to try to make it more affordable for people to connect. Can you go to the next slide? So we're going to run very briefly. I know most people are most interested in getting to the cost, so we're going to get to that pretty soon, or what we think the costs are going to be. Why are we interested in septic systems in general? Because the main reason is that from a nutrient removal standpoint, and mostly we're talking about nitrogen here, the conventional septic system and even the BAT system is not as effective as our wastewater treatment plants. So our plants are performing, as I mentioned, at a high level, removing about 90% more nutrients than a conventional septic system would remove. Can you go to the next slide? And septic systems in general are a significant source within Anne Arundel County. So there's 40,000 septic systems in Anne Arundel County, 13,000 in the critical area, which is within 1,000 foot of a tidal waterway. That's a significant proportion of all the critical area septic systems statewide. And beyond just that septic influence in the waterway that makes its way to the Chesapeake Bay, there's also impacts on the local rivers and watersheds within Anne Arundel County. Can you go to the next slide? So there's a lot of information on this slide, but to really condense this down, what this is showing is the average estimated nitrogen load from a household, one single household in nitrogen per year. And on the right-hand side, you can see in the critical area, so there's that area very close to the water's edge. A typical conventional septic system would deliver about 18 pounds per year per household. If you have a BAT system, which does 50% removal, that's a significant increase in removal, so that takes it down to 9. And then on the green bar, the light green bar, which is our treatment plants are actually what they call now enhanced nutrient removal facilities, so we call them ENR facilities. If we discharge at the permit limit, that load per household would be 3 pounds per household per year, but our current performance has been about half of what the permit limit is. So really the current delivery from a household is about 1.5 pounds per household. So as you can see, there's a significant opportunity as septic systems connect to be able to reduce the nitrogen load to the waterways. The influence is greatest in the critical area because that's where the delivery is the greatest. Can we go to the next slide? So what are some of the benefits of this whole program? So for the general public and kind of where DPW is broader interested is in the decrease in nitrogen discharges into the Chesapeake Bay. This is going to help us maintain long-term requirements for nutrients. We're compliant right now with the Chesapeake Bay nutrient goals. And so part of this multi-pronged strategy that I mentioned at the outset was, how do we maintain compliance going forward, right? So this program is an element of that overall strategy. There's also going to be a benefit with fewer nutrients in our local waterways. This map shows all the different county watersheds. One thing that I think not everyone's aware of is that most of all of the county's watersheds, river watersheds, are listed as impaired for nutrients as well as the Chesapeake Bay. Can we go to the next slide? There's also some benefits for the homeowners, and these can be very site specific. So we're not going to really dwell on these, but we're going to mention a couple of the ones we've kind of heard these, anecdotally from different people in some of these other meetings. Sometimes the size of your septic system and your drain field is related to the size of your house. And that if you want to do a significant addition or change to your house, that septic system can be a restriction. Your septic system, also the drain field, whether it's behind the house or wherever it is, that limits the use of that space within your property, and very often you need to have the drain field plus reserve space. So that can impact how you're able to use your property. There's also an impact on the home value. We're usually really reluctant to say much about that, other than to consult a realtor if you're really interested in knowing about what the difference might be in the value of a home. So you can go to the next slide. For those that are still on a private well, there's a less of a risk of a contamination from a septic drain field. In this diagram, we're showing the well pretty close, but that's because we're just trying to condense the graphic. As most of you probably know, there's quite a bit of separation between your well and your septic system. It's not unusual to see one in the front and the other, one in the front of the house and the other on the other side of the house. We mentioned improvements to local waterways, and also you can avoid some of those ongoing septic system maintenance costs. And so we have the next slide. These are very general numbers that we've taken from some numbers I think that we've seen from the state's website and some other research. And it's just to remind, there is a cost associated with keeping a septic system, and from what we understand, it's really replacing the drain field is one of the most significant things if you have to get your drain field replaced. Okay, so when we're talking about the septic to sewer connection program, it's really focused on specific areas that are called eligible areas in the county code. So on this graphic, you see in the green is all of the sewer service area within the county, but the blue areas are really the focus of the septic sewer connection program. And we'll talk a little bit more about what makes an area eligible as we get further into the presentation. So overall, I guess to sort of sum up the program is that we have a need to protect our waterways and improve the water quality. We have a process, which was the petition process, and we've refined that with changes. And so now we've been developing this process for neighborhoods to show interest, submit an application if they're interested, help learn about the funding options, and then move to the petition process if that's a good fit for them. And our action plan is to try to get 6,000 septic systems connected over the next 30 years. So if we can have approximately 200 per year. So a lot of the, this is a good transition. Okay, so I know that this neighborhood had a sewer petition a long time ago. I don't quite remember how long ago it was. And so there's probably some people on the call that are familiar with the petition process through that experience. And so most of what we're going to be talking about in this presentation are the things that have been changed in the petition process. So, but a little bit of background on, kind of how we got to this point is that initially when the state came out with guidance for reducing nitrogen levels, it was looking for Anne Arundel County to reduce septic sector loads by close to 50%. So out of that inventory in the county of 40,000 septic systems, that meant we were starting to look at whether it was possible to connect up to 20,000 septic systems. Okay, so we developed a lot of conceptual layouts, which is really the basis of the information we're going to be talking about tonight. We developed some basic costs for that. But we decided then to start a septic task force, which had components from the business community, environmental groups, and community groups. And we talked about some of the issues that would be involved in trying to develop changes to the septic connection program. And we used the task force to give us feedback on policies, prioritization criteria, and suggestions on subsidies, incentives, and our outreach. So the most direct result from the task force feedback was the county legislation that was passed at the end of last year and the beginning of this year to enable DPW to offer subsidies to certain projects and to allow a partial deferment of the annual assessment. And we're going to be talking about that in a little more detail later in the presentation about those deferment and subsidy discussions. Because there's so many possible areas that could connect, we've also developed an application process because we couldn't really practically, from a practical standpoint, offer subsidy to every conceivable area. So there's an application and ranking process that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So as I mentioned, the blue areas are really the eligible areas for the program. There's a couple of main criteria that make you an eligible area. It's if you're in the critical area, if you're in what's called a on-site wastewater management problem area, that's basically a septic system problem area, a known problem area. If you're in a septic connection area, which is really an area that we identified as part of our planning as being close enough to the county's existing system for a connection to be feasible. And you can also be eligible if you're in a project that includes one of those areas. Okay, so a lot of the Gingerville area is eligible because it is in the critical area. So on this map is a potential area to be served. And I guess what I want to clarify again is that this was a conceptual planning effort that we were doing in DPW, looking at what areas could possibly be connected to the public system. And so this is not a defined project area that the county is planning to start a project on. Okay, but it's we present this because we already have the information and we have an idea of what that area could look like if everybody in the drainage area was interested. Okay, when a little further on, we're going to talk more about a project area, and a project area can be any size. Okay, a project can be 10 houses or 50 houses or 100 houses, or it could be everything here. The project area is really defined by the residents who turn in the petition. Okay, so when we're showing this map, what we want at least people to understand is what is the possible drainage area. Now, in this area, what we had conceptually worked out is that it could be drained basically towards the southeast, and then the county has a force main that runs along the main road there. And so this project would involve a pumping station and then a connection to the county's force main system. And with that, we're going to pause for questions. I don't have the chat open, so I'm not sure.
I can read the questions, George.
Yeah.
The first one, I have a BAC system which put a restriction on my property deed. How will this process change the restriction?
So my understanding would be that that restriction would go away if you were connected to the public sewer. Because part of that, that was one of the benefits that is sort of tied to when you make that connection.
Okay. And the next question, I realized the premise of your presentation, but I had understood that this area was on the county's master plan for future water and sewer. Is this not true, or has this changed?
It's true that it's shown for future water sewer. What's always a little confusing, honestly, even to me sometimes, is what that designation means. So if it's in the future service area, that does not mean that DPW has an active project in mind for serving that area. It's more of a planning designation that's an area that the county may extend service to at some point. But it doesn't mean that the county has an active project in mind. We actually get that question quite a bit from people about what that actually means.
Okay. Next comments. It looks like it may have been by another resident, but let me go ahead and read just to make sure. The resident is saying that some residents in the neighborhood were recently connected to public water, and it seems strange and not cost effective to approach these similar projects independently. The next resident was saying that was a group that had organized and went through a county process that took multiple years to complete. These houses have no meters to account for their water uses for taxes, and that they had the most readily available access to another community to make it possible to bring that water supply to them.
Okay, so I guess what would probably be good to go through is from a kind of broader perspective, what is the petition process? So the petition process is the residents are requesting that DPW extend public service to their area. Okay, so and I think in the code it's actually called extension at the request of the owners. Okay, so it's a process where people are on their own private well or private sewer, and they're basically coming to the county, their local government, saying, will you extend service to our area? So in that sense, it's a reactive process, the petition process. And some of the changes that were made to the code make it a little more flexible in terms of DPW being able to work with the community. But in earlier stages, it was, we would get a map from the residents and say, this is the project area, and that was the only area we looked at. And because that was the area encompassed by the petition that we received from the residents. So I understand in terms of looking at it and saying, well, this wasn't really very well planned. And I guess the short answer on that is, well, no, because it wasn't planned, because it was being done to react to a petition request from the residents. Some of the other code changes that, the main ones we're talking about tonight are going to be the subsidy and the deferral. But there were some other code changes that give us a little bit more flexibility to look at project areas and sort of communicate with the residents a little more about things. And some of that was to address, I think where the kind of the heart of this question is, it's not very well planned out. So there have been some changes to do that, but at the core, it's still, the petition is still a request from the residents for an extension of sewer to their area, or water if it's a water petition.
Okay, I want to address the next two questions. It seems like the remaining ones have to do with process. So the first one is where will the pumping station be located?
So the pumping station, we would define that further as we got into, if there's a project that seems like there's some interest in, but, very preliminary, we were looking at areas on the low and kind of in the southeast corner, I believe, kind of around that area where Wallace Manor Road comes in towards Route 2.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Ricky.
Yes, the next question, are there sewer access options for properties that back up to commercial properties along the Admiral Cochrane Harriet Truman Road sides of the community?
Well, I suppose the short answer would be yes. There could be, in terms of if we were looking at connecting, one of the things that we look at when we are evaluating one of these possible projects is the capacity of the existing infrastructure that we would be tying into. But yeah, we would evaluate technical options. It would depend on what the actual project area that we have under consideration as well.
Okay, looks like the remainder of the questions have to do with application and petition. So I'm going to ask that we defer those questions until later on in the presentation and move on to the next section.
Okay. So I'm going to hand it off to our Ed Shea from HDR. HDR is a consulting firm that's been helping us develop the program and all the different aspects of the program. They've also helped us with the layouts and the funding, the cost. So Ed's going to take over for a while and run through the costs and what we think the possible cost would be for this area. So.
Great, thanks, George. So the county, as George mentioned, the county's developed a new program around the petition process to reduce costs. And so we'll go through some of the basic elements of those costs, which are illustrated here in this figure. We've got the project costs to construct the local sewers in the right-of-way, or typically in the street. We've got on-site costs, which we refer to as private costs. So that would be anything related to work on your property, abandoning the septic system, reconfiguring the piping that comes out of the home, constructing the sewer lateral that brings the wastewater to the main that's in the street. And then the third element is the CFCC, or the Capital Facility Connection Charge. So that represents the county's investment in the water reclamation facility capacity to treat your wastewater. So on the next slide, we've got a closer up version of this picture just to give you a better sense of a typical layout. So the typical septic tank, which is the heart of the system. The tank could remain in place, but we say abandoned, meaning that the sewage is pumped out and hauled away. The sewer lateral terminates at a cleanout that's at the property line, and that's where the county would have maintenance access to clean the line going into the trunk sewer. And this work on private property would be done by a licensed disposal system contractor, or a master plumber is the other certification that we'll typically reference. This would be somebody that you would select. The county does not maintain a list of recommended plumbers, but there are certifications to get somebody who is experienced at doing this type of work. So, what are some of the average costs per household? So the project cost, when we say project cost, we're talking about the public sewer element, the main sewer that's in the street. Per household, For your neighborhood, we'd expect that to fall in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. These project costs, as you can see, they're dependent on a variety of factors listed there in the blue box. Depending on a pump station, how much of the system would be served by grinder pumps for those who have topography that slopes away from the main sewer. We might need a grinder pump, the depth of the sewer. All those factor into the project costs, and that project cost gets turned into an assessment, an annual assessment. So we'll talk about that in more detail in the upcoming slides. But that's what we mean when we say project cost for the public part of the sewer. For the on-site costs or the private costs, typically this would cost less than $10,000 per home. We've got a list of several projects that have been done over the last few years. That's where this bar chart is coming from, actual installation costs for the on-site work. Most of the homes in your neighborhood tend to be set back a little bit further from the roadway, so that's one thing that could increase these costs, just simply because there's a longer distance to connect to the main sewer. And as we said before, you control this work, so you're hiring a master plumber to perform this work on your property. So we'll pause there and address any questions we've received on those slides.
Yeah, I'll go back up and pick up where I left off. There was some questions about doing septic and water at the same time.
Yeah, I can talk about that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, with a petition, you can petition for a water extension and a sewer extension at the same time. We analyze those as if they were separate projects, and then the residents are asked to vote on them as if they were separate projects. But if they both went forward, they would be done as one project. We're not going to talk much about water tonight because there really weren't any. There were some administrative sort of changes, procedural changes to water petitions that were just associated with the general petition process changes, but the deferments, the partial deferment and the partial deferment and the subsidy, which are going to be talked about more in the costs discussion, are not available for water. So those are only for sewer, and that's really what the changes related to the septic to sewer connection program. So these changes were made specific to sewer connections as they are related to petition projects. So that's why, but yes, you can do water and sewer petition. I think there was a question about the process should be opened up to people who are adjacent, and that it kind of seems like the petition process happens in a vacuum. I would say, yeah, that is kind of how the process worked. In that, we were in a very kind of, we in DPW were reacting to what was sent in by the residents. So, and I think we have a little more flexibility to look at areas and talk to the residents about what might make sense, but ultimately, it's the petition that comes from the residents is going to define that project area. But we would definitely encourage you to talk to everyone around you to see, where their interest is. How many households need to agree?
There's one more question before that. How long will this process take?
We're going to talk a little bit more about the timelines later, so I'd like to just defer that one for now.
Okay.
And I think the same will apply for the voting. We're going to talk a little bit more about the voting a little bit later in the presentation. So I'd like to kind of defer that one. So I see there's a comment about that we actually included 2 neighborhoods in the mailings. So the project area doesn't have to conform to a neighborhood, and it usually wouldn't have to. I mean, because when we did our initial layout, we're looking at a drainage area. So where does it look like the sewage, wants to drain to? And we're doing that irrespective of where the community boundary is.
Right, I get it. But doesn't the preponderance of votes have to go neighborhood by neighborhood?
No, ma'am. So the votes are done on a per lot basis. So, and the vote is based on whoever is defined in the eventual project area. So the project area can be smaller than one of the neighborhoods, or it could be one of the neighborhoods and half of another neighborhood. And the way the votes are done on a one vote per lot, it's so the HOA isn't voting on behalf of the community. I guess we want to clarify that. If there's a formal HOA, I'm not sure if there's a formal HOA or if it's just a community association. But either way, the vote is based on per lot.
There was a question related to the cost slides. The $10,000 for private, does that include the cost to abandon your septic tank?
Yes. So I think what Ed mentioned is, that cost with the private side costs is costs that were shared with us by the health department over with, what has been reimbursed through the BRF fund. So that would include that decommissioning.
Okay, looks like there was another comment about doing water and sewer together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comment is that isn't it more efficient to do them together? And so yes, it is, but at the same time, and I guess we need to clarify this part, is that in the petition process, the projects need to be what's called financially self-sufficient. Okay, so that means self-sufficient from the perspective of DPW. Okay, so the residents reimburse the county for the cost of the project. So yeah, in aggregate, if you're gonna do water and sewer, it's best to do them at one time. There's no question about that. However, that's a more expensive project than if you're just doing sewer. So, but it can certainly be done that way, and there's definitely efficiencies in doing it that way. The reason we're not talking much about water tonight is because this presentation is about changes to the petition process related to sewer extensions, and the subsidies and the deferments are not associated with water.
All right, some more questions here. Regarding the project cost, $60,000, $70,000, what would the subsidy reduce this by?
We're going to have some slides coming up in just a few minutes that are going to show a little bit more what we think the annual costs are going to be, so I'd like to defer that one real briefly.
All right. Traditionally, Anne Arundel County has set up the front charges to run with the land and thus transfer to subsequent new owners for the balance of amortization period. The connection fees are not transferable. They need to be paid off upon transfer. Would this follow a similar concept to paying back the cost of installation?
So yes, and we're going to talk more about that in more detail in an upcoming section. One thing to note that as part of the changes to the petition process, we're no longer using the front foot assessment approach. It's going to be equally divided among the properties that receive connections.
All right, and then our last question before we jump back into the slides. For a project this size, how large would the pumping station be, and what would it look like at the corner of Route 2 and Wallace Manor Road?
I am having trouble recalling the number off the top of my head, so I'm going to come back to that a little later as we go through the other sections. Generally, it's It would be a submersible pumping station, and we would have a small building associated with it that we would have a generator. But let me do a little research on the side while some of the other team members are presenting.
Thanks, George. And yeah, we do have that one slide that shows the footprint that we could come back to a little bit later. So on the potential funding sources, the septic task force that we talked about helped initiate legislation to allow for the county to provide a subsidy for a percentage of the project costs. So again, that's a percentage of the public side costs to construct the sewer in the street. The state, administered through MDE, has the Bay Restoration Fund, and that's something that is currently supporting the private side connection costs for homeowners in the county. The BRF grants can be used to offset the on-site costs, and also the CFCC. The county is continuing to work with the state to hopefully get some additional grant funding that would reduce the assessment, the annual assessment cost as well. And also looking for ways to take advantage of state revolving fund and other low interest loans that would also keep that annual assessment down. The terms of the subsidy were established in the county's legislation. So what it says is for homeowners with income less than $300,000 a year, up to 25% of the per property cost, or the, on a homeowner's basis of that project cost, 25% can be used to reduce the assessment. For those with income greater than $300,000 a year, it's a half subsidy, so that's 12.5%. And there's an established ranking system to prioritize which communities might be selected. If there are multiple applications in a given year, there's a ranking system that identifies some criteria about which communities will be prioritized. So this is a new feature that was not a part of the previous petition process with the subsidies that help bring the cost down. A little bit more on the Bay Restoration Fund. The timing of that funding available to homeowners coincides with the project being constructed. So that funding comes as the homeowner connects. It's administered through the health department, and it's actually paid directly to the contractor who performs the work on your property. Or it goes directly to the county in the case where it's being used to pay down the CFCC. There's a disclaimer here: state funding is limited each fiscal year, so it's not 100% guaranteed, but this has been a steady source of funding for several years. Currently it's at up to $20,000. Typically, $20,000 is more than what's needed to pay for the upfront costs. One of the county's priorities is to reduce or eliminate the upfront costs as much as possible. So that's where this grant is currently being used. The county is working with MDE to be able to use some of that funding to pay down the assessment as well. This next slide just shows how the costs get built up into the annual assessment. So previously, this was a 30-year term that coincided with the county's borrowing terms. The new program is set up for homeowners to pay back on a 40-year term. So the construction costs, together with the other project costs for design, any kind of easement acquisitions that are needed, construction inspections, other overhead costs, are rolled into the net assessable amount. And any available subsidy is subtracted from that net assessable amount and gets turned into your annual assessment. So, like I mentioned, that $5,000, so there's currently $20,000 available. We'd like to assume that about $5,000 of that per property could be used to lower the assessment and still have $15,000 left over to pay off the on-site costs in the CFCC. There's also, in addition to the subsidy, there's a deferment option. And so this is another new feature of the program brought about by the legislation. Homeowners have the option to defer up to 50% of the assessment. Certain homeowners meeting criteria for elderly, low income, or permanently disabled, and there are clear definitions for this in the code. Elderly is defined as 60 years old or older, have the option to defer up to 100% of the cost. And the deferment, it goes for the 40-year term or upon property transfer. So we're going to have some examples coming up to go through what that looks like. Again, a comment on the BRF funding that's available, it's a half BRF grant, just like with the county subsidy for households that are greater than 300,000. But those households still have the option to defer up to 50% of costs. And then for vacant lots, there is no option for subsidy deferment or the BRF grants. So here's a few different cost scenarios to outline what you could expect. Starting on the left, just the subsidy only, so not deferring, not choosing the deferment option, but with the county's subsidy, costs could be expected to run between about $1,700 and $2,800 annually. So that's the difference between the green bar. That's kind of the high-low range that we're expecting. This includes the sewer usage fees that you would be responsible for once you're connected to public sewer. So currently a typical bill, which is paid quarterly, if you set on a monthly basis, it's about $35 a month. So about $420 a year is included in this bar chart for sewer usage fees. So that's why that third bar, the subsidy and 100% deferment, even though you're deferring 100% of the cost of the assessment, you're still paying the sewer usage fees every quarter for about $420 a year. On the right side, those three bars represent for high income, so those who would be receiving a half subsidy, half the BRF grant that's available, could expect to pay between $2,300 and $3,500 if you're only taking the subsidy, and then deferment brings it down quite a bit, up to $2,000 annually. So just a summary of these different options for the assessment and the homeowner private side costs. Private side costs, the goal is to have that almost totally paid if possible, using the BRF grants. The capital facility connection charge also could be paid with the BRF grant that is currently available.
So Ed, if I can jump in for a second, I saw we had a comment about what is the CFCC right now in terms of dollar value. So I was able to look that up. It's $9,351 right now, and in July 1st, 2022, it goes to $10,286. And just to kind of connect to the earlier discussion, what if you did water also, those same capital facility, you pay the same amount for water. So if you do water and sewer, it would be $18,700 something for capital facility connection charges.
Yeah, and I see the question. I'll try to answer these other couple of questions before I hand it off to Kim to talk about the deferment examples. But the criteria for ranking,
I can defer that one, Ed, because we got a slide about that a little later.
Yeah, great, yeah, great. Yeah. And what is the subsidy for families with an income above $300,000? So again, that's instead of 25% of the project cost, it would be 7.5. It would be 12.5%. So it's a half subsidy, up to 12.5% of the project cost. And the BRF grant, instead of up to 20,000, it would be up to 10,000 total.
So I mangled the explanation on the sewer connection charges, so let me try that again. So there's a capital facility connection charge for sewer. If you did it today, it would be $9,351. Separately, if you did water, it would also be $9,351. So if you were to do water and sewer, it would be $18,700 something dollars. So there's a capital facility connection charge associated with sewer, and there's a capital facility charge associated with water. So I know I didn't make that really clear the first time, so I apologize for that. On the assessment, the underlying basis of the assessment is that the project needs to be self-sufficient. That's actually the language in the code. The DPW director has to certify that the project is financially self-sufficient. So that is achieved by the residents paying DPW back for the cost of the project. And the mechanism for that is the assessment. So the assessment is paid off over 40 years, and Kim's going to talk a little bit more. Kim Clooney from our financial group is going to talk a little bit more about the details of how that's done. But essentially what's going on is that assessment is how DPW is reimbursed for the cost of the project. One of the changes to the code that is mentioned here, we've talked about a whole lot, is the normal term for the assessment is 30 years. And one change to the code for these sewer projects was 40 years. And the intent of that was just to help lessen the annual payment.
Can you clarify on the capital connection fee? Is that that is a fee and not part of any work performed on the owner's property? Is that correct?
Yes, the capital facility connection is not part of the work performed on the owner's property. That's correct.
Yeah, so these three columns on this slide represent the three different cost elements that are all different from each other. And the last thing I'll point out before I hand it over to Kim, the assessment is typically billed at the beginning of every year. This is separate from your tax bill, so it's a separate statement with the assessment for the sewer project. And Kim's going to go through some examples of how the deferred payment works.
All right, so the partial deferral is available to all residential homeowners in a project area. And this does not have income limits, and it's an option that you can choose to take advantage of. You can defer up to 50% of the total project cost for up to 40 years or until you transfer the property. But that's up to the homeowner how much they decide that they want to defer. So just as an example, if the total 40-year assessment was $90,000, generally your yearly assessment without the deferral would be $2,250 per year. If you chose to do the 50% deferral of $45,000, your yearly assessment would change to $1,125,000 per year. And then when you sold the house at any time after, any of the time or after 40 years, you would need to pay back the $45,000 that was deferred. However, the remaining years of the assessment would be paid by the next homeowner at $1,125,000 per year. So you would pay that assessment for the years that you owned the home, and then the next owner would pay it for the remaining years up to the 40 years. Okay. So the full deferral is for people that meet income qualifications and are elderly or permanently disabled. And this one works a little bit differently than the partial deferral. So if someone qualified for this, there's 40-year total assessment would be $90,000, the same as in the other one. However, each individual payment of $2,250 per year would be deferred. So until the time that they transfer the house. So once they transferred the house, say after 10 years as an example, they would pay back all 10 of those deferred payments, which would be $22,500. And then the next homeowner would continue to pay the $2,250 per year. So this slide is just a comparison using the same assumptions to show the difference in what would be paid back after a certain number of years if they sold the house. So under the 50% in that far right column, under the 50% septic connection deferment, the payment would be $45,000 whether you sold your house after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, etc. Under the elderly and disabled deferment, after 5 years, you would be responsible for paying back 5 payments. So that would be $11,250. After 10 years, it would be $22,500. After 15 years, it would be $33,750. And then after 20 years, it would be $45,000.
Thanks.
So there were some questions pop up.
Yeah. First question, resident would like to know if they're currently taxed at a lower rate as sewer well properties versus comparable properties that have the county water and sewer. If so, what is the average difference?
I do not have an answer to that, as the tax rates are set by the state and the county's tax rate. However, I can say that the water and sewer expenses to run the programs and to do all of these is paid by the people who have water and sewer service. So we do not receive any tax dollars to operate the water and sewer utilities.
Okay. Next question, is the deferment interest free? Is it the same cost today versus 40 years from now?
Okay, so that's a great question. The way that we do the interest for this program is that the county takes out a bond or a low interest loan from the state for 30 years. So we calculate what that 30-year interest it is going to be for the county to pay off that project. And then we take that total cost that includes that interest and divide it by 40. So basically the interest is going to be recovered whether you pay it off all at one time, if you defer something, or if you wait until 40 years to pay off that deferment. It's just that we make it into equal annual payments for you to do that. So the interest is going to be the same regardless. There is not additional interest for deferring or paying over 40 years versus 30 years.
All right, next question. If you elect to defer and live there for 10 years, you subsidize the future owners by 50%. Why?
So the option for the deferral was suggested by the task force that we had as a way to lower the payment. It is fully up to the owner. When this project goes forward, you would make the decision of whether you wanted to do that or not, understanding that that could benefit a future owner.
Okay. And then
yeah, I would add that we've had in some presentations we've had a question more or less along the lines of how do I make sure the next owner pays the most, in terms of the assessment, and the way you do that is you don't take a deferment, or you take as small a deferment as as you can.
Okay. And to clarify, water and sewer charges do not affect property tax bills.
The water and sewer charges, yes, do not have an effect on the property tax bill. The value of your property is what determines the property tax bill. So if being on well and septic changes the property values, that's something you would need to talk to a realtor about to see if that may have an impact on your property tax. However, we do not receive any money from property taxes It's all from usage rates and connection fees and the other charges that the water and sewer utility charges.
Okay, it looks like we're all caught up in the chat with questions for now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go over the process a bit from what we're calling the application process through the petition process. So where we're at right now in this meeting is like the beginning of the beginning. Okay, so the program changes, as we mentioned, they came about earlier this year. We've had some announcements about the program, and we're our real focus right now is going out, talking to different communities, and letting people know about the program, and what are some of the changes to the program. The step one is kind of where we are. So we've had a little bit of interest from different people in this area. So we send out the mailers. The mailers are really sent to everybody in that drainage area that we think is could possibly be served, because that's at least a conceivable area that could be worked on. If there is additional interest, people can we can get an application, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, what's involved in an application. It's not too rigorous, but that application will define a project area. So there was a little bit of discussion earlier about there's 2 neighborhoods, and does it need to be all of the neighborhood or part of it. We can talk with a contact person about what that area might look like, what a project area might look like. We would then do a conceptual engineering evaluation, though, so that would look in more detail at the area that's in the application, so that if it's smaller, then we would take a closer look at that, and we would have a follow-up meeting with that group, that neighborhood, or sub area of the neighborhood, and present updated costs. So it would be very similar to the discussion tonight, except be a little more focused on, okay, it would be a shorter presentation, but we would also go through and say, okay, here's what we think the more refined costs are. After that, step 2 meeting, at that point, the neighborhood or the community would have to decide whether they want to file a formal petition to start a petition process. And so at that point, what would go on is there would be a neighborhood representative who would be distributing petition forms that would indicate the area. The residents are asked to indicate whether they're interested or not interested in the petition. It's a simple majority, so 50 plus 1, basically 50% plus 1. If the petition has that majority at the time, and then it comes over to us in engineering, and we'll do what's called a preliminary engineering study or a schematic design report. The terms are kind of interchangeable. And that will look at in much more detail what we think is going to go on for that specific area that's defined in the petition. And we will present updated project costs and a cost estimate, and Kim's group will also figure out what we think that assessment rate's going to be. And so we'll have a public hearing, we'll go over all that. After that, a ballot will be sent out to the petitioners, and if that goes forward, and it's a 50% plus 1, then DPW goes forward with constructing, finalizing the design and eventually the system. So can you go to the next slide? I'm just taking a look at the chat questions. The community votes, there was, okay, so when we're using the term community, we're not using it in the context as I think that we're thinking the community is defined by the petition area, not necessarily the community area. So when I'm using when these slides are saying the community is voting, we mean the community as defined by the petition area. And then how is the population defined, the 51%. So again, that is defined by the project area. So if the petition area is 25 homes, then those are the 25 votes that are counted. If you're not in the petition area, then you won't receive a ballot, and you won't even get a notice of the hearing, although it runs in the paper, so you could know about it if you saw it. So just to go through on the petition process, this is just a little more detail on the steps. So the community files the petition. Again, you could use the word neighborhood, you could use street, okay? It's just a group of residents that are sending the petition to DPW. We're gonna do a preliminary engineering study. We will hold, and that's where we're gonna update the costs. Then we'll hold a public hearing and we'll go over the proposed project and what the costs are. There'll be a ballot that's sent out, and then we'll count the ballot results. And then, can you go to the next one? The next slide, please. If the majority approves, the job goes to a final design. So that's when we prepare all the plans, specifications. We advertise construction. We hire the contractor. The contractor is going to do the work, and once the project is completed and ready, there'll be a notice that's sent out to all the residents. It says it's released for service, and residents have 9 months at that point to connect. And the assessments begin the following year, usually the beginning of the following calendar year. If you've recently installed a septic system, you may be able to get a waiver, an extension, not a waiver, an extension on the connection time frame. So you might not have to connect within 9 months, but you would still have the annual assessment to pay. So let me get caught up on a few questions. So what's the minimum for a petition area? So a minimum petition area is 1 property. Very rarely we see those, but that's consistent with the way the code is. Do petition areas have to be contiguous? That's an excellent question. I forgot to mention that. They do have to be contiguous from the point of connection to the county system out to the end of the project area. So that's really important, because if the project goes forward, everybody in the project area has to connect. So we can't, everybody is forced to connect. So the 51% can make the 49% connect. And we can't leapfrog over properties. So that's one reason it's good to be communicating with the people around you to figure out, where's the interest and where isn't the interest. I think there's a question about how much configuration can be done with the project area. So the main constraints are what I mentioned earlier, is it has to be contiguous from the point of connection to the county system, wherever that is, to the end of the project area. And that includes both sides of a street. We have some flexibility about maybe how far up the street we go, or whether we pick up a side street. So that's something we can talk about if there's some interest in the area, and a group of people might be interested in an application. We can talk a little bit about that. I'm falling behind on the chat. So,
George, where are you trying to connect to? That's what we don't understand. Like, what is our starting point outside of Gingerville?
So this connection is because we have this force main going along Route 2. Our pumping station would connect into that. The discharge from our pumping station would connect into that. So we'd be trying to drain it down. We would be able to try to drain flow down to a lower spot in the area for a centralized pump station, and then we would connect into our force main. So small grinder pump systems, that like individual houses, they're not allowed to connect to a large county force main. But if we were building a separate pump station, we could connect to that force main. But we don't, since we don't actually know what project area we would be looking at, we don't really have a set location. If that does that make sense?
Sort of.
And George, the next question is, for those of us For those of us along Cardamom, is it possible to connect to businesses/homes behind our houses?
I'm looking at the street right now.
They're talking about because of the townhouse subdivision behind us. That you just put the
Yeah. It would depend on what the project area that's submitted. I'll be honest, my recollection though is that line along Four-Mast Alley is close to capacity right now. So I don't think we would be able to put much more into that particular. So if it was a significant number of homes, we would possibly have to upsize that entire line. That's something we would look at actually in the schematic design report, is because at that point we have a defined area and we know how many homes we're looking at. And we actually know where they are too, right? So we can say what are the different options for providing service to that area.
Yeah, George, I was just going to add to the statement you just made that it's don't negotiate with yourself would be, I think, our advice, right? If you think you can put together a group of neighbors who have interest, bring that forward, and then we can come back with some possibilities for how it could get connected. But it's not always easy to look at a map and just say, go this way or go that way. So don't let that stop you from submitting for interest.
And then George, next question, do we know all the possible access points to the community? Is it just the Route 2 access?
Well, generally the drainage area, as I think we looked at it conceptually, is going to the south, and so that's, and the connection point would be Route 2. I think I see what everyone's talking about. There's other portions of the collection system that are sort of on the northern edge of the neighborhood, and I guess maybe to merge with what Ed was saying, if we were looking at a project area that was exclusively sort of on the northern edge of the neighborhood, then we're going to look at what is the most efficient way to serve the community that's defined in the project area. From the context of when we were doing these conceptual layouts quite some time ago, we were looking at that whole drainage area and where does it look like it could go, and that's what was bringing us to that southern spot and the connection to Route 2. So a smaller area in a slightly different location. I mean, you conceivably, if you had a small enough area and if it was going into a sewer that didn't need to be upsized, maybe that's a less expensive project. But that's the kind of thing that we would, when we're talking about, we're showing costs tonight, those are really based on this hypothetical, like all the homes connect and they all come down to this pumping station, right? And because that's how we were doing our concept costs and layouts at that time. So when we say if somebody turns in an application, then we have an actual project area to look at, and we can try to update some of those costs to give a little better idea of what we think the costs are going to be. And I saw a question about, did we show the costs? So we did. We're going to talk a little bit later about how you can access the slides and the recording. So if you missed the beginning, there'll be an opportunity to come back and at least take a look at the slides and listen to the whole meeting if you're interested in that. Okay, so a comment that the costs seem very high. We've developed the costs based on looking at some of our historical numbers from past projects. We've had recent estimates from some other efforts that seem to be in line with the costs that we're showing. So ultimately, the assessment is based on what the cost actually is to the county, the way Kim was describing it. So, your final assessment is done after the project is complete, And at that point, we know all the final costs for the project. So I understand the cost may seem high. This is our best information right now. If a project goes forward, we'll update that. And we're going to share all that information. I would say kind of that the costs are too high, or what we hear from most people. But from the context of, at the end of the day, the residents are going to be reimbursing the county for the cost of the project. So we're not doing anybody any favors if we make the project costs seem lower than we think they're going to be.
All right, a couple more questions related to the petition process. Could project areas merge over time? Say two communities don't communicate well and two neighboring projects could or should be combined to potentially reduce overall project costs?
So that's a really interesting question. I don't think we've gotten that before. So normally, once the petition comes in, that's fixed. And you can't really add on to that. If we think there's an interest from two adjacent areas, we would probably try to put those community representatives together to see if we can get the petition to be one area. And generally, yes, you get the larger the project, the lower the per lot costs are typically. So there is an economy of scale for larger projects, but it is harder, admittedly, for people to kind of organize that. So.
And related to that, another question is, why is the approach focused on getting the homeowners to organize to petition? Why can't we just vote within the Gingerville critical area?
So I guess the simplest answer is because the program changes here are changes that have been made to the existing petition process. So if you think that kind of the very beginning, the county's trying to reduce nitrogen loads through a number of different methods throughout the county, DPW that is, and the county more broadly. And connecting a septic system to the public sewer will significantly reduce the nitrogen load if we're able to do this on a larger scale. And so one of the things we took to the task force was, okay, how would we do this? I mean, what would this program look like? And that feedback was, well, let's try to keep a voluntary petition program, but provide incentives to make it more affordable for people. So it's an excellent question, but I think the simplest answer is because this is still the petition process. The changes have been made are to try to make it more affordable, but at the end, it's still the residents in an area requesting public sewer to be extended to their area. That being said, that project area can be whatever group that wants to be. So there's a question about, sorry.
Yeah, it looks like the next question is still looking at different access points. Would looking at the area from Paragon near the pool on the way to Riva Road be possible?
Again, we would, when we're looking at a specific area, we would evaluate whatever options are available. I mean, with what we were talking about tonight was based on that entire drainage area as we drew that boundary. But that's part of the process in terms of when we get to an actual petition and we're looking at alignment alternatives. That's really what we're going to be looking at. What's the most efficient way to do this community?
All right.
So I think there's a question kind of related to why doesn't DPW do a broader plan to connect public sewers? And I think the answer is that that would be a really expensive program if the county was taking that on, and so the discussion about was really how could we make some simpler changes to the petition process to see if we can make it more affordable for different communities. The county's got 40,000 septic systems, 20,000 of them we think that there's at least a technical possibility that they could be connected. So our program goal is to get 6,000 of those connected. And so from that standpoint, it's just a continuation of the existing petition process. There's a question about, is there like kind of an efficient size? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you the things that are going to impact sort of that net cost is how many homes are on a given stretch of street. Okay, so kind of how wide your lot is, and also whether you've got two houses. If you've got houses on both sides of the street, right? So if you have a lot where, if we have a street where we're going a half a mile and there's only houses on the right-hand side, that's going to cost more per house than if there's homes on the right-hand and the left-hand side. I see another comment about the cost. I mean, I can only say, kind of restate what I was saying before. We're trying to present people with the best information that we have. I know it's costly, but that's the information that we have. And okay.
I can provide a little bit of comment here. So if you're looking at a new development, most likely that developer paid to put in that water and sewer line as part of their cost, and they also paid those same fees, the capital facility connection fees. They would have to pay, and a lot of times they will also charge a front foot assessment when you purchase the house, which would not be reflective in the selling cost of the house, but it's part of the disclosures whenever that house is sold. If the county had put in the line, say you did one where there was a previous petition, then that remaining front foot could also be something that you would be required to pay. So even if it's a new house, it may have a front foot assessment either to the county or to an independent company that the developer has used in order to charge those costs to get their costs back for putting in the water and sewer lines. Now, theirs may be cheaper than ours because if you're doing a new development, most likely, nothing's built there, so you're not having to tear up roads and then reinstate them. You're just putting the infrastructure in and then building the roads over top of it.
All right, next question. Could a project area include houses which were not notified and did not vote? For example, one house on each end of a street, run the petition with 50 houses in between. Would those 50 be part of the final vote?
So you would not, if you're not in the project area, you would not vote, but you wouldn't be forced to connect either. If in theory, you could include a project area could include half a street or 3/4 of a street or the whole street, as long as it's still contiguous to the point where it connects to the county's system. I'm not sure if that exactly answered the question.
The county mails the ballots to every house to the owners of every house that are in the petition area, and we do send the correspondent certified mail to every owner of every property that is in the petition area.
And if you don't respond to the ballot, it's counted as a no. So you have to affirmatively agree to the proposed assessment to be counted as a yes. Now, within that, it's still the majority, with the 50 plus 1.
All right.
So I think I see kind of a general question on doing them through petitions seems inefficient. So the broader question is within the context of the program. So the county is meeting its nutrient goals right now. So we're not in a situation where we feel like, okay, we got to go out and we got to hook up 10,000 septic systems tomorrow. So this plan is really about how do we position ourselves to maintain compliance going forward. And so one of the ways that we can do that is saying, okay, if we can get 200 homes a year to connect over the next 30 years, that's going to help us maintain our compliance with our nutrient loads. And so that was really kind of the framework in developing the program. And that took us then to, okay, well, what do we need to do to change the petition process to make it a little bit more affordable so that we could get some people to actually do connections? Because I think most people, and by most I mean nearly all, are reacting to the cost the way some people are tonight, and we hardly have any sewer petitions go through. So that was really kind of the framework of our approach here.
Okay, so it looks like we're all caught up in questions for now, so we can go on to the next steps.
Okay, so we've set up a through the ourwater.org program page. There's a septic to sewer connection element. There's also information on the other parts of the program, but we set up a community web page, and you know, you can get there one of two ways. One way is you can use the link that's right on here, and that'll take you straight to it. Another way is if you go to the septic sewer part of the menu, you type in your address, it should pop up and say you're in an eligible area, and you should get a little blue box that says go to your community webpage. And on the webpage, we're going to have the slides from tonight's presentation, and within about a week or so, we'll have the recording from tonight's presentation, and then we'll probably post some other additional information related to the program at that point. One thing we would appreciate is that there's a spot there in the box where you can let us know if you're interested or if you're not interested, and you can leave some comments. We've been doing quite a number of these presentations starting in the summer, and we're kind of going to be doing them probably out into November. So we know this is a lot of information, and we try to break it up. But any feedback about sort of how the information is presented is appreciated. We want people to, our goals really here are to learn about the program, kind of understand what the process looks like, and get some idea of what the costs might be, so that they can kind of continue that discussion within their community. I'm going to answer I see in the chat, so how many of these sewer connections have occurred so far? Can we know what communities have done this? How? So this program just started this year, so we have not had anybody connect under this program. We've been doing outreach most of the late summer here into fall, and we're hoping as people learn more about the program that we'll get interest in there. There's a question about a property-specific estimate, so we can't really provide a property-specific estimate. What I would say is, if you look at those historical costs, like we have a couple of things mentioned there that are going to tend to push you towards the right-hand side of that chart, the more expensive stuff, which is really, those things are how far your lot is, so how far your house is from the street, because our connection is going to be at the street. It's going to depend on, sometimes people have to do landscaping or driveway restoration. That impacts their costs. Sometimes the topography of a lot means that somebody actually has to put a pump behind their house and then pump up to our system. And then sometimes just the configuration of the piping around your house can be expensive. So all of that is really site specific. we wanted to kind of share the information that we have, but we really can't get much more detailed than that. Have we received any petitions from any communities? No, we have not yet. But we have had the petition process in the past. That's correct. We have not had a lot of people connect through petitions. And we have had more people do water petitions because the water is less costly, frankly. It's as a pressurized line, it doesn't have to conform to gravity. So we basically put it in 4 to 5 feet below grade. We have a lot more flexibility on the alignment, and of course we don't have to build anything like a pumping station. So very generally the water petitions are less expensive than the sewer petitions. So where okay, so the question, if I understand it, is has anybody done a petition for sewer connection? So that answer is yes, but not many, and not in more recent times. I'm not, but yeah, I mean, there have been communities that did sewer petitions separate from this program. That has happened. I'm not sure what some of the drivers were for those communities. Within the last, have there been any petitions within the last 5 years? I think that is a no. Kim, I'm trying to think of what was Woodhome.
I can go through the files and see. Let me check real quick and see if I have anything on it.
I would say no. I mean, okay, so thank you, Kim. Kim can check on. That's the last one that I remember. It was called Woodhome Circle. I think that was more than 5 years ago. So we have just a couple slides left. So I appreciate everybody staying with us here. We had a question earlier about how applications are ranked. And let me just go over that real quick. So when we get an application, the application is really set up to help us determine where we would offer a subsidy in a given application cycle. So in theory, we can't offer a subsidy to every community that might be interested. So we developed this ranking process, and really it emphasizes a couple of the key criteria related to the code. So, how many pounds of nitrogen are being removed by the project, how many properties are in the critical area, if the properties are in septic system problem areas, we want to give those a higher priority. And then we also look at some cost metrics like the cost per pound, the cost per connection, the distance from the county's infrastructure. So this is going to be the ranking system we use for different applications. If you go to the previous slide, Rikia, I forgot to talk about this slide. So with the application, again, we're not really looking for this to be too rigorous. We're looking for a community name or a neighborhood name, someplace that we can assign to the area. We would need a contact person and a project area map, and we could work with whoever is the contact person to confirm that map. And we're also looking for some initial show of support. So if the area under consideration conformed to a neighborhood boundary, we could use a letter from a civic association. We could also work with an online poll. The other thing is, if you're, we can see the responses on the website if you're interested or not interested. So if you go into the web page and you make it known sort of where your thoughts are on it, excuse me, we can take a look at that too. And really what we're looking for is if it's only one person out of a possible area of 50, that's kind of what we want to know. We want to know that there's at least some interest. It doesn't have to be 50% because, the county's going to put some effort into the conceptual engineering part of it to refine it. But it's not as significant as, like, say, when we do a schematic design report. So we did talk about the application. I'm going to catch up. That's our formal presentation tonight. I'm going to ask the team to stay on to take questions, and we'll stay on as long as as long as we have questions. So let me get. How can we be meeting the nitrogen goals at this rate? So that's a great question. Ricky, can you go to the slides with the first one with the stormwater? And we've been making a lot of progress with our stormwater program and with the county's wastewater treatment plants. And so the compliance right now with the nutrient goals is really on the backs of those sectors. So you're probably familiar with the stormwater fee, and that's been used. This is a graphic that they have a wonderful website. You learn everything you want to know about what the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration is doing. They're making progress on a lot of goals, and that's been reducing loads. If you could go to the next slide, Rakia. And then this is shows our wastewater reclamation facilities. I mentioned before, we've invested a lot in these treatment facilities. They're really performing at a high level, probably some of the best performance in the state. And you can see here our loads are down 50% from where they were 10 years ago. So our compliance right now in meeting these goals is based on the success that we've had in these other sectors. As we go forward, more people are going to move in, so our wastewater loads are probably going to go up a little bit. We might have changes to the stormwater loads, and so part of this plan is to sort of figure out how do we stay ahead of those nutrient goals, and that's where this more modest septic connection goal is coming from. If someone didn't petition, how did you get the home to connect to public sewer? So that's a really good question, and I don't really have the historical base, I think, to answer that. I know that Anne Arundel County very generally had a lot of pre-existing communities before there was a lot of organized plans for water and sewer service. So I think that's I don't know really honestly know the history very well. I know there are a lot of little places where there's private utilities. I did have a petition project, now I think about it, probably 8 or 9 years ago, where homes were going into a private sewage treatment plant, and we decommissioned that treatment plant and turned it into a pumping. Well, we built a pumping station next to it. So, that exactly how the county's system got to be where it is exactly, I don't really have the full history of that.
There's also individual connections where there is where the infrastructure is nearby, that they can hire a private utility contractor to come in and do it just for their house instead of going through the petition process. So there are some that have converted in that manner as well. And as an update, George, Wood Home Circle was 2013.
Okay. So that's that was probably one that would be maybe comparable, because that was a larger number of homes connecting to the public sewer through individual connections. The other one I mentioned where we decommissioned an old private treatment plant, that was a little bit different because they already had their own collection system that went down to their treatment plant. So we really built a pump station there and diverted the flow over. So it was that was a petition, but it was kind of different than what something would be in this area. What would be the proposed, did we take into account increased level of nitrogen by decaying and aging systems? So in terms of our overall planning, we're assuming that the loads may go up from the treatment plants and from sort of the stormwater sector. Our goal in terms of maintaining the system is to keep it at a level where we're not having leaks and we're not having spills to a point where that becomes a significant component. I don't think we ever are frankly going to get to that point, but you have to do that through an asset management program. And the county already does spend a lot of money on inspections and cleaning and replacing older pipes. And that's certainly kind of part of, in terms of where we're headed as a utility, and all utilities, really, asset management is a critical aspect of, how do you maintain the reliability of your system going forward. What's the proposed location of a pumping station? So we would look for, ideally, we find county property that's near the low spot of our proposed area, of the proposed area. Probably the next thing would be to look for a lot that's not developed, or a lot that has a spot where we think we could fit a pumping station, and we would have to acquire the rights to that. We'd have to get an easement for that, or purchase a segment of that property. So, and where that would go exactly would again be tied to what specific project area would be. I think, Ricky, can you go to the next slide? There was a question about kind of what the pump station would look like.
Sure.
The main feature on the pump station, most of the elements are below ground. So if a submersible pumping station, there's what's called a wet well. There's a top hatch that's visible, but there's a wet well, there's valve vaults, but mostly those are kind of concrete. They extend like 6 inches out of the ground. A lot of times we'll have a building with the pump station. This particular footprint is kind of our standard. It's roughly 20 by 20 building. This one is set up around the idea that we have the generator inside the building and controls on the other side. So, where there's some flexibility in how the building looks and, the materials construction. And in some places we put generators outside, which saves some cost by reducing the footprint. But we would take a look at that, and that would probably be something, if we got into a schematic design report, we'd want to share our idea, with the community about what the pump station might look like. So the question is, what about areas without HOAs? So we will try to assist, with the outreach efforts. I think we're not looking for an HOA or a civic association to sponsor the project. I think it's probably a little more appropriate that we use that we utilize their capability of communicating with residents. So it gives us a good way to communicate with people. But if a potential project area is outside, or there's a possibility, we can try to facilitate some of those discussions. We have had some other areas where the drainage area goes far beyond where an HOA or a particular civic association has had its boundary, and so if there were interest in those areas, we would probably want to try to say, well, hey, you should contact your neighbors up the street, or that type of thing. One thing that kind of helps us too is, since you know, if we know kind of where interest is, then that helps us a little bit with that discussion. So the community, yeah, I think this is a clarification. The community does not have to be the entire HOA. That's absolutely correct. It's just an organized area. That's well stated. We might start using that terminology going forward. I think our use of the word community has created a little bit of confusion in earlier presentations. So, do you get a discount for that? Unfortunately, no. Okay, so I think we're caught up on the questions. I know this has been a lot of information and a long presentation, so but we've had a lot of great questions. I appreciate everyone's time. Let me see. There's one question about under the new. I'm not. Oh. Am I caught up? Yes, I'm caught up. Sorry. Somehow I went back like 15 questions ago, and I started thinking that I just answered that question a little while ago. So okay. Yeah. Again, thanks for everybody's time. You know, if you have some neighbors that couldn't come to the meeting, please, you know, let them know about the web page. We're hoping that that's a great way to for people to be able to go in and at least get caught up on what was talked about and get an idea of what the cost might be. And we'll hold on for a few more minutes, and but otherwise, thanks for everyone's time and have a good evening.
Recording stopped.